Okay, it's great to be here. And as Jeff said earlier, I think one of the great parts of having a job like ours is you get to go around and meet a lot of very interesting people and hear their stories. And essentially that's my job, is to be their storyteller and to convey the challenges that they faced, how they overcame them, find something that's universal. And it's really just an incredible opportunity to have these two guys together right now. This is the first time anything like this has happened. Dong has come from Vietnam just for this. So I think it's a really terrific opportunity to learn a bit from them. So Nolan Bushnell once said that the more revolutionary an idea is, the fewer people will think it's cool. If he's right, then my two guests on today's panel are as uncool as it gets. Nolan is often called the father of the video game business. He founded two of the most influential companies in the industry, Atari and Chuck E. Cheese. He also took most of my lawn mowing money when I was growing up, along with most of my friends, I have to say.
I appreciate it.
Can I have that back? His games such as Pong, Breakout, and Asteroids defined and inspired a generation. Little did we know how they were also wiring our minds for our lives today. Nolan went on to found many other innovative companies, most recently BrainRush, which uses games to boost learning. His new book is called Finding the Next Steve Jobs, and Nolan should know he was Jobs' boss when Jobs worked at Atari. Our other panelist, Dong Nguyen, is among the most successful designers from the new generation of game makers. Over a weekend last year in his hometown of Hanoi, he made a mobile game in the spirit of Nintendo. The object was to fly a bug-eyed, big-lipped, bloated bird between a series of green vertical pipes. The quicker a player tapped the screen, the higher the bird would fly. He called the game Flappy Bird. With no marketing, really just a tweet announcing the game, Flappy Bird ultimately went viral, topping the charts in more than 100 countries and becoming an international sensation of the kind that we haven't really seen in years. It was downloaded over 50 million times. It was all the more shocking when Dong pulled the game from the internet because, as he put it, people were becoming too addicted to playing it. But the demand remained. And according to one study, a new Flappy Bird clone was popping up online every 24 minutes in the days after the game was pulled, including a Miley Cyrus Flappy Bird and a Drake Flappy Bird, and you name it. But don't worry, Dong is working on new games and that will be coming out soon. Though they come from different generations and backgrounds, Dong and Nolan share something powerful. A commitment to game design, which, as Nolan once put it, can be summed up by the phrase, easy to learn, difficult to master. For those of us not in game design, this answers a broad and compelling question. How do you get someone's attention and keep it? And that's what we're going to discuss today. I've had the pleasure of interviewing and writing about them both, and will you please welcome Nolan Bushnell and Dong Nguyen. I thought we would start with a question that is on everyone's minds, I think, which is, what are your high scores in Flappy Bird?
It is 150.
150?
Yeah.
4.
Has anyone else here played Flappy Bird? Yeah. So 4 is not bad, actually, if you've played it. Let's start out with Nolan. When you look back at Pong had really what I think remains kind of the most elegant instructions in gaming. Avoid missing ball for high score. And that was it. How did you arrive at this formula of easy to learn and difficult to master?
Well, remember, Atari started out in the coin-operated game business. And so we were sort of balanced between how do you make a game that is satisfying immediately upon dropping a quarter in. But at the same time, you had to get the person to fail in 3 minutes so that you could get the next quarter.
More money.
And so we decided that we had to escalate the difficulty, not too fast, so that everybody felt like they got a good piece of their money back, but yet at the same time make it challenging enough that they wanted to come back and get better and better and better. And it turns out that that's the metric that if you adapt games and now in education, if you can keep kids learning and playing and having fun at this just right, we call it the Goldilocks point, it's ultimate in happiness and ultimate in effectiveness.
Dong, what for you are the essentials of effective game design?
I have no idea about the essential principle of game design in general. I only have my own idea about mobile games only. And at first, I want to make something that people can play anytime, anywhere. Because people today don't have much time anymore. They carry mobile phone everywhere they go. So they should have something to entertainment for a few minutes. And Flappy Bird is the greatest example of a game they can play in a few minutes. Because most of people cannot pass, most people, it's hard to pass more than 10 points in the game.
Right.
Yeah. The second important thing is I want to make something that people can easily to remember. Easy to remember. It means I have to put something that make people feel peaceful and they feel familiar. Like I have a background of city in the game and have a blue sky that every of Nintendo games has. And I think the only thing that most people remember about my game is their own high score.
Is their own high score?
Yeah.
Well, it's usually a low score, so it's easy to remember. It's not like a big several digits.
Because most people cannot get more than 10 points, so it's only have one figure.
Right.
And they can easily to remember their own high score.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can really understate how, I mean, that was really such a game-changing experience. This idea of a game that completely just destroyed you so much that you had to destroy it back immediately, and you couldn't stop. You got a nice feedback loop. But going to Nolan, and taking a step back, and we were talking about this a bit earlier today, you know, when you were starting out, you were not just starting your own company as a young man, but you were essentially, it was the birth of a medium. And I wondered what was your strategy going into that tremendous challenge in marketing that?
Well, the big problem that we had is, first of all, nobody thought that games were a business. And so we always had no capital. I mean, we tried very, very hard to get investors, but this will sound funny, but I hadn't heard the word venture capital. There was one venture capitalist in the area, and I didn't know him. I didn't know he was there. So it was this thing where people couldn't think of games as actually having economic value. And so that was hard. The other part was the technology was really lousy. Pong had a square ball, not because we thought that square balls were cool. It was because that's about as good as we could do. And so we were, the first few years, we were right on the edge of what the technology could do at the time within the cost constraints. And so we were constantly fighting what we wanted to do with what the technology would let us do. which we don't have the problem now. You know, basically software is free, and the Atari games were 2,000 bytes in the cartridge. 2,000 bytes. The Atari 2600, the RAM was 128 bytes. That's no memory.
Yeah.
That's really hard. And anyway, that's...
What's interesting, and going back to Dong, is that, you know, even though you grew up a little after, you're not part of that Atari generation, you know, you grew up playing the Nintendo games for the most part. And I don't know that people could get Atari in Vietnam, actually, anyway, when the time... It was hard enough to get the Nintendo games, I know, as we were talking.
We smuggled them everywhere.
Yeah. I'm curious about what was the appeal of that generation of games for you that you're now really paying tribute to in your games now?
The only game that I can remember right now is the game I play in the childhood. So it naturally, those games influence my work right now. I think the retro game has the retro game are more focused, and because playing a retro game, I don't have to really learn how to play. Because I can learn by my own mistake. I know what I did wrong in the last time, so I will figure out the way I can avoid it in the next time. I also love the art style of the retro game. Is use very limited pixel and make the characters is more iconic.
The characters are more iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easy to remember too.
Easy to remember, yeah. So you're talking about kind of really a frictionless kind of entry to playing the game, which I think was what we all remember about those titles growing up. I mean, you didn't have to go through a tutorial where someone's showing you how to shoot, you know, your fire Uzi into the watermelon or whatever it is. I mean, you basically just start and play, and in a way, it does seem like people want to have that more immediate visceral experience now because everyone is so busy. Yeah. You know, and these games designed that you can just get in and out of them very quickly. But just taking a step further, just with regard to Flappy Bird, you know, how did that influence kind of the design of Flappy Bird?
Retro games don't have much content in them, and my games is very small too. There are only a few elements in the game. Instead of adding more content in the game, I should focus more time. I should spend more time on tuning the gameplay to make it right. Retro games is all about reflection and accuracy. It makes a retro game addictive, and I use that idea to my games.
Let's talk for a second about what not to do. And I think not only in creating a game, but maybe in any kind of piece of content. And as an example, I'm going to use what was until recently one of the great urban legends in gaming, was that Atari had made so many E.T. cartridges that they were buried in a desert in New Mexico. As some of you might know, very recently an intrepid film crew went out and actually supposedly found these cartridges and dug them up, which was quite a find. My first question, I guess, is, Nolan, if you knew those were there in the desert and you just didn't tell
First
anyone.
of all, I had left 3 years before, so not on my watch. But the real story was that the guys that were running Atari after me didn't play games. They were suits. And as a result, they didn't have a feeling for what it took. And in those days, a good cartridge took at least 6 months to design because it was really hard because of the memory constraints and all that. You had to keep track of a lot of stuff, and it was hard. But they thought that an ET game would be cool, so they did a licensing deal in late August, but the cartridge had to start shipping in middle October or early November. And
did this coincide with the movie, or was it after?
It was the movie was coming out, but it was really more for the holiday season. Mm-hmm. That was really what it was all about. And in 6 months, or in 6 weeks, to do a full cartridge game, it was impossible. I actually got an early copy, and because I had some friends, and they'd always steal stuff and give them to me. And I thought it was broken. I thought that the game that actually was shipped was a broken game. I thought that I'd gotten a bad copy. Not so true. It was so horrible. It was unplayable. And so they thought that the power of the license was all it was, because they weren't game players. They didn't care. They didn't know. And so all of a sudden they had this tsunami of returned cartridges. And so the best thing to do was to bury them in the desert and then pour concrete over the top.
There's no bodies in there, too, with the ET cartridge.
I think there actually should be, but there wasn't.
But taking this as the ultimate example of what you don't want to have happen to your game, although now they couldn't bury a mobile game in the desert so easily. But what are the mistakes you think that you see that people commonly make when they're creating games now?
The most common mistake that designers often to make is they're trying to make something similar to the sausage game before.
They're trying to make something similar to a successful game before?
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
They're ripping something off.
Yeah.
Which you're familiar with, because there were more rip-offs of your game than probably any other in the last decade.
But I think it's better for them is to make something different.
Make something different.
And they will have more chance to be succeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that, we were talking about this as well earlier, that you've just got to have that belief in what you're doing and that conviction. And certainly I know that over the years in the games, the other developers I've interviewed, whether it's the creators of Doom and Quake or, Grand Theft Auto, there's something shared there, which is that real singular vision, and that they're ultimately, I think, were making games that they wanted to play themselves, and that found a universal audience.
I think there's another thing that a lot of people do, is they don't understand how critical the man-machine interface is with the gameplay. Like there's some wonderful old classics that required a joystick that are unplayable on a touchscreen. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people don't really understand how difficult it is to make sure that the man-machine interface is appropriate for the game that's being designed.
Let's take that segue. We only have a couple minutes left, but before we go, I'd like to just ask each of you, there's a lot of new hardware on the horizon. Google Glass, wearables, Oculus VR, which Facebook recently purchased, for $2 billion. Here we have two of the great game designers with us. So what kind of games do you see coming out on these new forms of hardware?
Massively spectacular, wonderful. I mean, I think VR has always been this promise of the holodeck for the Trekkies who are out there, and that you're there. And I can tell you that the technology is sufficient now that you can actually be in VR and not throw up. Motion sickness was always a big problem. Yeah. I mean, VR has been around on some levels for 20 years, but the motion sickness issue is you have a hard time making a business when you make people sick. So I just think it's going to be huge and wonderful.
I haven't tried VR device myself, but all the game that I think is adult game.
Adult game?
Yeah.
But when you say that, what do you mean? Because here, adult game has a different connotation.
Because I was in Tokyo before this trip to
Right.
New York, and
Maybe that
I
is what
see
you-
a lot of those games.
Yeah. Will we be playing a Flappy Bird in virtual reality? Maybe.
It's difficult to imagine how to implement
Yeah.
VR.
Okay, we'll see. Well, anyway, we're out of time, but thank you.
Thank you.